Welcome to Firstline Compliance's Carefully Off the Cuff.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Josh.
And I am Mel. I am the cat wrangler here at Firstline Compliance. So Josh, you just got back we literally just got back from the NMLS Conference yesterday. And
in my eyes.
I hope you had a good trip. So let's talk about one of the things that I know that people have been asking some questions about, and that's disclosures. Let's talk about the disclosures on the MU submissions for loan officers and whatnot. What's up there?
Yeah, so just as a brief recap, the NMLS system, CSBS, and ARMOR had proposed some revisions to the disclosure questions. So these are the ones in the individual MU4, in the control officer MU2, in the company MU1 that ask things like, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Or in the last 10 years, did you have this type of financial incident? So those questions were up for proposed revisions. With those revisions, there was an opportunity for public comment. The public comment period has now closed, and the regulators are close to finalizing their review and updates or adjustments based on that public feedback. So one thing I would say, timeline yet to be determined, but in the next 6 to 12 months, anticipate that those disclosure questions, the revised disclosure questions, will be pushed out. That's going to be significant, maybe something to connect with us on. Some answers that were no maybe are yeses, some that were yeses maybe nos, and whenever those answers change, it's really helpful to be prepared to have an explanation why.
I can imagine, and we'll put the contact information below the video as well so people know how to reach out in the first place.
Perfect.
So disclosures are going to be changing and people need to be aware of that, and I know you can't go into details because it's still in process, but
yeah, we won't know what the final versions are until all of the public comments have been reviewed. And maybe we can post a link. The proposals to the revisions were made available so people can take a look at that and see kind of the general gist of what was changing.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I'll put a link below the video on that then too. Awesome. Okay, so reporting season. It's not quite over, but some of the big ones have just gone through. And one of the reports that impact their world is the call report. What have you heard about that?
Yeah, so a couple updates there. So one, as most folks know, for the call report version, in particular the consolidated financial statements, we've been using the standard and the expanded versions of the call reports. And we're currently, to be totally technical, on version 5. So the 5th version of those call reports. There's the standard, which are for non-agency approved lenders, and then the expanded for lenders that have a Fannie or a Freddie type approval. Version 6 is nearing being released. The major difference with version 6 is it will eliminate the standard and the expanded, and there will be one version or one call report that will be used for all entity types. So that could contain some pretty significant changes, primarily because, again, the standard was more consolidated, a shorter version. The expanded, by nature, was expanded, had additional fields, particularly related to financial activity and things like that. So expect similarly in the next probably 6 to 12 month time frame that version to be released as well.
Who's gonna feel the impact of that like the most in terms of our industry? Like who should be most aware of some of these changes?
The easy version is to say everyone, because all of us have to file a call report. And just remember, you're required to file a call report, even if you have no activity, the first quarter starting after you got a license. So if you're brand new and you've just gotten a license in February, then you're going to need to file the Q2 call report due, I think it's May 14th, even though you have no activity. So just one reminder there. The second piece, I think the NMLS group has tried to be pretty intentional and aware here. Clearly, someone who's like a small mortgage broker, the majority of the information on the expanded call report just isn't applicable. But the way the system is trying to solve for that is based on the license type and the business activities that are in the NMLS. It should pre-populate most of the non-applicable fields with zeros. Lenders would also know, or brokers as well, if there are sections on the form that don't apply, then just populate those with zeros. And the regulators are going to be understanding of that and kind of expecting it, because they'll see, well, you're a mortgage broker, you won't have to do servicing data, or how many foreclosures did you process? That's just not applicable to the business type.
Got it. Okay. Well, okay. Regulators, speaking of regulators, one of the things you get to do at the NMLS conference is you get to meet and communicate with the regulators of this industry and ask them questions. What are some things that you got to talk to some regulators about here?
So I'll jump into that in a sec, but you raise a really good point. And let me leave this as the plug for anyone who didn't go. The NMLS conference is incredibly valuable, primarily because of this opportunity to network and meet the regulators. Regulators are people too. That might be shocking to some. Almost all of them are really nice. And so Jara Ryan, really happy to have under the Firstline Compliance fold. First time Jara and I were working together and we both went to the NMLS conference, we finished the regulator meet and greet, and she kind of pulled me aside after and said, Josh, you just hugged all the regulators. And I was kind of like, well, yeah, they're my friends. You know, this is like a high school reunion. I haven't seen them in a long time since this one last year. And it's the opportunity to say hello. And she kind of said, well, Josh, you're the only one hugging the regulators. So let that just be my public service announcement. Be nice to your regulators.
Right.
They are our allies. They are not our adversaries. We can work together. We have the same goals. And it might be shocking to hear, but when you're nice to them, they're nice back. And it's not a bulletproof. It doesn't give you a get out of jail free, but it does increase the likelihood that they're going to call you back and that they're willing to give you almost the benefit of the doubt, or at least have the conversation to understand the fuller picture. Okay, public service announcement aside, there were 3 questions that we get asked a lot, and there's a lot of variation based on the states according to the question. So let me just give very high levels on those and really encourage anyone who has more questions, please reach out. Would love to talk to you more in depth about that or give you some more specifics. So the first one that we hear a lot is related to dual employment. Can a loan originator also be a realtor? So the way this came out, obviously in the question picking up a lot because of the FHA mortgagee letter from December that said, we have watered down or lightened, given more leniency to allowing loan originators to play more than one role in a transaction. From the state regulator side, while there are some states, and a few states I'll say, that prohibit that or will not allow it, the majority of states are of the mind that we don't have a prohibition written into our statutes or regulations that it cannot happen. So I think that's really interesting. They do emphasize the kind of risk component of conflict of interest. So if someone is both the realtor and the LO, is there a likelihood they may do something to get either or both of those transactions to close? So even though it may not be strictly prohibited, still not something or a decision to make lightly, really one to think through and make sure that we've got a good risk-based decision behind that. The second one is on paying our originators 1099 or W-2. So let me just kind of remind everyone, the question I really think is, does a loan originator need to be our employee, or can they be a contract employee, a contract relationship? The W-2 or 1099 are just the forms of payment that we record to the IRS, but those words often get used interchangeably. And so almost a similar response to the first question. There is not, except for a few states, a prohibition or requirement that the LOs be your full-time W-2 employee. Many states are okay or don't, or they don't disallow payment based on independent contractor relationships. However, my caution, and they echoed as well, there are more than just the state licensing requirements to think through in that scenario. For the Bureau of Labor, for IRS components, for many state requirements, there's a certain threshold or set of criteria that determines or sets whether someone can be considered an independent contractor. Those often include things like having flexibility over your time, your schedule, how you perform your work, use of your own equipment, use of your own technology. Compare that to the requirements of an LO who's sponsored by a company and the oversight and supervision elements that come along with that, let alone that we're likely have to use their technology, things like LOS or CRMs. We have to follow the lender's policies and procedures. So while there may be an allowance under the state licensing thought or regimen, there could be some conflicts related to whether someone needs to be paid Social Security or Medicare, or whether that person truly is an independent contractor. Also, just keep in mind, there could be some RESPA implications. Remember, the primary role of many mortgage originators is to refer consumers in for business. Paying for a referral is a black and white violation of Section 8 of RESPA. There's an exception. W-2 employees are allowed to be paid based on giving referrals. Independent contractors don't have that same exemption. So what could be at the surface a very easy, short question really has a lot of tentacles that can be expanded. Yeah. The third one, and this is one, again, we get asked quite frequently, especially given the kind of shifting dynamics that the market has been going through over the last short to medium time frame, and that is team names. I work for 123 mortgage lender, but I want to advertise as the Josh team or the Weinberg team. Does that team name need to be listed as a DBA? What I will tell you is there is a large amount of variation in the opinion of the regulators. For regulators that do not require it to be a DBA, they still have some safeguards to put in place so that it's explicitly clear to the consumer who they're doing business with. So if the Josh team is under the logo of 123 Mortgage Lender and the website is 123mortgagelender.com, and my advertising includes the licensing information and the NMLS information, it is very clear and easy for the consumer to understand and know they're working with 123 Mortgage Lender. Then using the Josh team or the Weinberg team or something like that is not as concerning to them. Be clear though, and it's important to do the state-by-state analysis, there are quite a few states who will say any name used to advertise or market to the public, even under the banner of 123 Mortgage, is going to see that as a DBA or an other trade name. So depending on the state, or let's say the districts as applicable, like District of Columbia is not a state, but often to list a doing business as or an other trade name will require registration with the Secretary of State, including the name on your surety bond or getting a rider to include it. And so it may not be as simple a process of just adding it to the NMLS, where other states are perfectly fine with that. They want it to be added as another trade name, but they would not require it to be registered with Secretary of State or on the surety bonds. They just want to know what's being used to the public.
Is this where I plug Firstline Compliance can help you with this? Because
I will, if not
right.
Someone,
right.
I really, and back to my earlier point, these are the questions you can call the regulators and ask.
Yeah.
They are willing to have the conversation. They like this type of engagement. They would much rather you ask and get permission instead of begging for forgiveness when they cite you for it in an exam.
Oh, I bet.
Regulators don't love the contentious nature of exam findings, but there are rules that have to be followed, and those often come up in the exam context. And when there's a violation, they are required to cite it. And just to remind folks, repeat violations are a much bigger deal. So be cautious on those as well. Mel, let me come back to one piece. Just I'm backtracking a little bit,
yeah.
But related to the kind of call report filings, there was actually a question that was raised in the ombudsman meeting, another valuable piece of the conference, and that was around the financial statements. So within, make sure I do this right, 90 days of quarter end of the fiscal year, 90 days after the fiscal year ends, depending on the state, there are copies of financial statements that need to be uploaded. Some states require audited, some states require consolidated, some require reviewed, some don't, just require company compiled. Particularly for those that require audited financials. Many of the accounting firms have been busy. they're suffering similar experiences that many industries have of not having enough staff or having a hard time keeping up with volume. And so some lenders have not been able to file their audited financials because the auditor has not yet completed their work. Let me be clear, this is not all accounting firms. And if you need some recommendations on those that are doing them on time, we're happy to help you with those. But suffice it to say, the regulators were asked the question, what happens in that circumstance? And some, again, a lot of variation amongst the states. Some regulators said, just let us know, send us an email or put a note that says our auditors are behind. We'll upload our audited financials as soon as we can. That gives them the information as why. Other states have a statutory requirement that they be filed on time. And so if they're not filed, you may have a $250 fine, but it's not going to be a consent order or anything that needs to be publicly posted in the NMLS. Other states do have a requirement that they're required to be on time. And if you don't file on time, there will be a fine and there will be a consent order. Connecticut is one state that comes up. And so just quick shout out to Rich Cortez, working his way towards retirement. Rich, your values and your contributions have been invaluable, and we're glad we get you for these next 14 months. We're going to be reaching out a lot. But Rich raised the comment, do the best you can. You've likely done your own financials. Put that information up there and then give me a note to say we're waiting on our audited back. And when you get those audited back, if there need to be changes, update them. So again, a lot of variation across the states. Really important to be aware of what the requirements are of all the states for where we do business. If you're unsure, you don't know, ask the question and ask early so that there's time to make adjustments and update before the actual deadline hits.
Yeah, and I'll put links below the video for ways to find the contact information. And I can tell you from experience working with you guys and helping with licensing, like every time I've ever had to reach out to a state and reach out to a regulator, I think Rich might have even been one of them. They are so gracious and so easy to communicate with, and they literally just want to help you do it right, because if you do it right, it's best for everybody, the consumer, the company, you as the individual. Like, so yeah, they are friends. They deserve the hugs.
They really do. Let me give one last shout out to Josh Keshin, our vice president, who's been able to come with me to the conference. And it's one of those values where we're now known as the Joshes to most of the state regulators. I really am not sure that they know which one of us they're talking to when they email or get us on the phone. The good news is they like both of us. So, and it's that same process. When you're nice and you contribute and you put in a little time to ask a question and it's not just shooting everything across the bow, it really helps go a long way in cementing or having a successful dialogue or exchange with those regulators. One last piece and we'll close it out. This is a surprise, Mel. I didn't even tell you about this one. There was a request or a question that some states are taking longer than others in the review or approval of applications or changes of controls and things like that. The request was that the NMLS and the system include in their accreditation standards. So the states have to be accredited in order to meet the NMLS compliance requirements, that a timeliness of reviewing or responding to applications be considered as part of the accreditation process. That if we industry are held to a certain standard and timeline of providing information, then states should stick to some of those timelines as well. This was met with, I think, a little bit of contentiousness from the regulators. But what I will say is the common response or the common reason most regulators were a little nervous about this was because they spend so much time reviewing applications that are incomplete. So I really think this falls into like the 80-20 rule, where they're spending 80% of their time reviewing incomplete applications or applications that have inaccurate information. And that's taking up all their time to work with the 20% that are submitting them clean and complete. I think that's one of the reasons Firstline does really well in these areas and tends to see license applications approved pretty quickly, because we make sure to review that we're sending a complete application and or let the regulator know upfront what might be changing or might be different from what they're expecting. Kind of like loan originators and underwriting, kind of like examinations, You want to make sure your submission is clean, complete, tidy. Doesn't hurt to put it in a shiny wrapper with the gift with gift wrapper, bow around it. Everything we can do to submit a good and clean application will go a long way in having that application be reviewed and approved more quickly.
Yeah. Well, and as somebody who helped with that, I can tell you, like, they have step-by-step process when you go through the NMLS. Like, and if you can't do it, either time or you're struggling with it or you don't understand, that's where either a company like Firstline comes in to help, right? Where we can help you do that, or reach out to the regulator and ask questions if you don't know. Their contact information is for every state is in the NMLS. Email, phone, everything. Like, all the information is there, and by not doing it correctly, you're shooting yourself in the foot, not making it go along quicker because you skirted something that was requested of you. So, like, if you can't do it, have somebody help you with it. That's a service that we provide. Or do it right and make your life easier.
Couldn't agree more. And like we talked about with some of these other issues, there is a lot of variation amongst the states. Oh, yeah. We're painfully aware of the contractions that the market has suffered, and have a lot of sympathy for many friends who are unfortunately out of work given the downturn. So we understand your licensing team may not be there, or the person that has done that and has had all this information inside their head, you may not be able to rely on quite as much. Reach out. We're happy to fill that gap. Sometimes there's a question that may seem like, oh, I don't really want them to know I'm asking that question. Firstline is really good at asking anonymous questions. We have the relationships that can say, I have a client who, and then we can give the information back to you. So you're spot on. This is not an area to guess. This is not an area to just throw and see what sticks. Follow the instructions on the checklists, verify before you submit, and do what you can to get it clean the first time.
Yep. There's no stupid questions about any of this, because you're right. Every state is different to one degree or another. And if you have the question, promise somebody else has had that same question. You're not alone.
Last point, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yep.
Look to states' pages for FAQs. State of Texas has some really good FAQs on their website that give a lot of information, answer some of the questions I asked, to which when I asked them at the conference, I said, well, have you read our FAQs? And so, well, yeah, but you're here. I'm asking you. So, but in all seriousness, the state websites do often have quite a bit of information. To the states that post FAQs, they're very helpful. Make sure to read those. To states that don't, they often still have like news releases or updates that they publish. Those are really helpful as well. If that's too time consuming, give us a call. We track all of that.
Nice.
Well, awesome. Thanks everyone for joining. As usual, please rate, subscribe, review. We'll talk to you next time. Mellissa, thanks so much for filling in.
Pleasure. Happy to do it anytime, and thanks for having me. Bye,
awesome.
everybody.
Bye, everyone.